Hello, everyone. My name is John, and welcome to Book Capacity. This is my April 2026 book recap. I had to say that April was a really great reading month for me as far as just the quality and quantity of the books that I read. I read some really great books, and a majority of these books were really just 4.5 5-star rated books, which was just a treat to discover. I'm just so excited. So, without further ado, let's just dive into the books I read for the month of April. So I had to kick off April with one of my favorite authors. I'm talking about the infamous Cormac McCarthy. The book I'm talking about is his first novel, The Orchard Keeper. If I had to describe this book, I would describe it as this Eastern Tennessee Appalachian fever dream. Majority of his books take place in this region of Tennessee, this Appalachian region, and this book is no exception. When it comes to the plot of this book, we need to follow three main characters. First character is John Wesley Ratner, a young boy whose father is murdered by our second main character. That second character goes by Marion Slider, an outlaw bootlegger. However, John does not know that Marion killed his father. Our last main character is Arthur Owensby. He is this old man who lives in seclusion and has this rotting orchard on his property. In this orchard, we find the body of John's dead father. Instead of reporting the body to the authorities, Arthur kind of guards and watches over the body for reasons that are not really fully explained in the book. This is essentially what drives the plot. I do not want to spoil too much of it. Other events do happen in the book that really affect all our characters. You begin to put the pieces together on how these three lives will eventually intertwine together. I will say this book is not for everyone. This is mainly because of the way that this book is structured. There are times in the book where it jumps scenes suddenly. So, for example, we can be reading about John setting traps in the creek, then all of a sudden it cuts to Arthur, who's just wandering around in the woods. Cormac McCarthy's books tend to be written kind of unconventionally, and Orchard Keeper is no exception. Like I mentioned in the beginning, this was his first book. However, it doesn't read like a first novel. Now, is this my favorite McCarthy book? No, not by a long shot. But it wasn't my least favorite either. I would say that this book is definitely trying to tell you something, but in classic McCarthy fashion, he doesn't really spell it out for you. Even today, if you were to ask me what the meaning behind this book is, I would really have to think about it. However, if I had to answer, I think for me, what stuck to me is what happened to John in the book. It's this idea we grow to learn as we grow up, that life doesn't really make sense. What makes sense doesn't really always give a positive response to the people around us, especially the people in powerful positions. Again, this is just my reflection, and you may take away something different if you decide to read it. It is slightly challenging to read as far as plot structure goes, but it's also just beautifully written. So I hope you decide to check it out and give it a try. When you were growing up, did people in your life ever tell you to be careful what you wish for because you just might get it? Well, I can think of no better example than this amazing yet equally horrifying book. I'm talking about The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This book takes place in England during the late 1800s and follows a young man and aristocrat who goes by Dorian Gray. Dorian's portrait is being painted by an artist named Basil. Basil has an aristocrat as a friend who goes by Lord Henry Wotton. Basil tells Henry about this portrait of Dorian being his greatest work ever, and how Dorian has become this really meaningful person in his life. It's so meaningful that Basil kind of sees Dorian as this mythological figure. Lord Henry quickly becomes friendly with Dorian despite Basil's wish for Henry not to meet Dorian for the fear of corrupting him. Again, Basil is almost obsessed with Dorian, and this is present throughout the book. Henry praises Dorian's youthful looks and the shame that one day his looks will fade away once age comes. Dorian becomes frightened by this idea of his youth fading away. He becomes obsessed with the portrait and wishes that the painting would age instead of him. At the time he says this, you really don't know if he's being dramatic or serious. Well, the portrait gradually ages while Dorian's appearance remains the same. When Dorian discovers this, he goes through a lot of emotions. He goes through horror, acceptance, and paranoia, just to name a few. Dorian is our main character, but I must say I really enjoyed the character contributions of Lord Henry and Basil. Lord Henry's dialogue on a variety of topics was very interesting and thought provoking, even though I didn't agree with all of it. I would argue Basil is the most good character, and you really feel for the guy as his life as an artist and this obsession with Dorian just really makes him suffer. They are significant characters whose words and actions really just shape the story. Given the plot location and time period, I thought the plot was going to be really stuffy and dry, but I was so glad to be proven wrong. I do not want to spoil too much more of the plot, but a lot happens, especially to Dorian. I am talking about plot escalations that left me in just a state of shock, amazement, and just wanting more. I will say that the ending is amazing. It's such a fitting and brilliantly done ending, and I can't say enough about it. I know I mentioned in the beginning of the review of this book that this is the perfect example of being careful what you wish for. It also made me reflect on the consequences of one's actions, the dangerous influence that one could have on an individual, the obsession with beauty, and the dangers of excess and how that can lead to one's own punishment in life. This book is so beautifully written, and I would even argue this could be classified as a horror book, even though it's not your conventional horror plot. This is without a doubt one of my favorite reads of the year. Highly recommend it, a true classic. Imagine you and a friend are accused of offenses that are punishable by death. However, your captor tells you that you can save your lives by getting a dozen eggs. Sounds easy, right? Well, I forgot to lay out some key details. You're in the middle of World War II in the Soviet Union during the siege of Leningrad, an environment where you're not only dealing with enemy soldiers, you are dealing with a population faced with starvation, displacement, and all the other awful consequences that war brings. Good luck finding those eggs. This is essentially the plot that leads us to one of my favorite reads of the year. I'm talking about City of Thieves. Now, you're probably wondering, what's the deal with these eggs and why are they such a key part of this plot? Well, I'll do my best to break it down. In City of Thieves, we follow two young Soviet men. The first man goes by Lev, who spots a dead German paratrooper. Given the conditions of Leningrad, Lev is looting the corpse, which is an offense during this time where food and supplies are being rationed. The Soviet army accuses him of looting and he throws him into custody. While he's in custody, he meets another young man who goes by Koya, who is a soldier that's accused of deserting his squad. The two young men are taken to a Soviet colonel who informs them that his daughter is getting married. Given the conditions of Leningrad, there is no eggs for his daughter's wedding cake. So he makes a deal with the two men. Find a dozen eggs in exchange for your freedom. I'll do my best not to spoil the plot, but this book is just about their journey to find these eggs in war-torn Russia. Their journey is just simply epic. They encounter cannibals, gunfire, love, fights with hunger, just to name a few. Lev and Koya's relationship changes from strangers to brothers in a way. They both talk trash to one another, they both bicker, but look out for one another and show moments of genuine care, even though the way they show it is really just different at times. Lev's father was a poet, and Koya wants to write his first novel, so there's a lot of book and history dialogue which I just ate up. There were times I had to remember our two main characters are not even 20, which adds just a layer of intensity based on all the horror they witnessed as young men. This was a surprisingly brutal book at times based on the graphic details that they depict about the reality living in the Soviet Union during wartime. However, this book does something that is just really hard to do. Despite the brutal nature of the book, you find genuine moments of humor in the absurdity of war through the character dialogue, and it creates this environment where it's easier to engage with those uncomfortable topics and themes. For those of you who do not know, the author is also known for his writing for the HBO series Game of Thrones. Given how the last season ended, I know the before and after feelings about the show are mixed amongst the fans. However, for me, it does not take away from the fact that the writing of this book was just easy to follow, brilliantly done, and it was raw, haunting, yet just equally beautiful. A plus book for me. The emotional roller coaster the ending takes you on is just the perfect cherry on top for just a classic. Go ahead and check it out. You're not going to be disappointed. If you were to ask me who is on my Mount Rushmore of authors, I can give you three pretty easily. In no particular order, my top three: Kurt Vonnegut, George Orwell, and Cormac McCarthy. My fourth spot is always a different answer depending on how I'm feeling that day. However, after reading two books from this author, I'm close to solidifying the coveted fourth spot. I'm talking about Larry McMurtry. Specifically, I'm talking about his book, Dead Man's Walk. When you hear about Larry McMurtry, you probably think of his famous book, Lonesome Dove. Now, I know I'm going to read Lonesome Dove at some point, but after doing some research, I learned that Lonesome Dove is part of a four-book series. The four books were all published out of order chronologically, but after some thinking, I decided to start with Dead Man's Walk, which was the first book that was based on the chronological order of the characters. Dead Man's Walk takes place in the early 1800s, and we follow our two main characters, Gus McCrae and Woodrow Call. Gus and Call are two young Texas Rangers who go on various expeditions across the Texas plains to liberate Santa Fe from the Mexican army. During this journey, they face austere weather, untamed wilderness, the Mexican military, and bloodthirsty, just violent Native Americans, just to name a few. In the book, Gus Call and his fellow Rangers have to walk a treacherous, barren stretch in the New Mexico desert that's called Dead Man's Walk, or Journey of the Dead Man, which I believe is the English translation of the name in Spanish. Throughout the book, Gus and Call are surrounded by just a wide variety of characters. The character development in this book is really just A plus because you really become attached to the characters and not just Gus and Call. In addition to the amazing character development, there is consistent suspense and amazing dialogue. There were times when I was reading this book thinking, how the heck are these characters going to get out of this sticky situation and live? Some of the encounters they have with the Comanches, Apache, and just the environment surrounding them is just chilling, and the suspense makes it really hard to put the book down. You also see the beginning of Gus and Call's friendship develop, and the dialogue between them is just amazing. It makes you want to laugh, it makes you want to cry, it makes you want to smile, and it just leaves a lasting mark on you. It's fair to say that Gus and Call are growing into some of my favorite literary characters of all time after reading this book. That being said, this book can get pretty violent and graphic at times. The expansion of the West in the early 1800s was really brutal, and the book does not spare those details at all. So just be warned if you're sensitive to those kinds of things, there's a lot of it in this book. From the research that I have done, most say that Dead Man's Walk is great, but it's no Lonesome Dove. This just made me super excited to read Lonesome Dove because I love Dead Man's Walk, and I thought this was an A-rated book already. And if folks are saying this is no Lonesome Dove, I can only imagine how great Lonesome Dove is. In closing, if you love westerns, adventure, or meaningful characters and dialogue, you will not be disappointed in this book. Go ahead and check it out. It's a great read. You will not be disappointed. Imagine you live in the 1950s and you have an average middle class life. You have a job, you have a wife. Then one day an old war buddy comes to your house unexpectedly, promises you a break for the suburban rat race, promising excitement and money. What can go wrong? Well, we learn in this book a lot can go wrong. This is the premise of this short crime book, Soft Touch by John MacDonald. Our main character, Jerry, is this stereotypical 1950s middle class male. But it's not all sunshine and rainbows for him that we learn in the book. He has an unhappy marriage. He's in a dead end job. His old war buddy, Vincent, drops by his house unexpectedly and proposes this low risk, high reward theft job. Vincent senses that Jerry is unhappy with his life, and after some convincing, Jerry agrees to this theft job. I don't want to spoil too much more of the plot, but I will say a lot happens. Things don't go as planned, and it just spirals out of control, affecting more than just Jerry and Vincent in the book. You know that Ron Burgundy meme where he's like, wow, that escalated quickly? Well, that's exactly how I would describe all the events that unravel in this book. Despite the two characters' questionable choices, to say the least, I would say that I found them weirdly funny with their dialogue and just their overall attitude about things. After reading Five Decembers in February, I got really interested in reading more crime novels, which led me to give this book a try. It's this old school crime novel, and overall, I did a good job of keeping me engaged. Plus, it's really short, so you can realistically finish this in 2 days. If you want a good mystery crime novel with some solid action, go ahead and give it a try and tell me what you think. In my February book review, I read Paul Beatty's Sellout, an absurd satire that exposes the persistence of racism in America. I really enjoyed that book, and it made me want to read more of his work, which led me to this book, The White Boy Shuffle. The White Boy Shuffle is a coming of age story where we follow this young African American kid who goes by Gunner, who grows up in this coastal suburb in Los Angeles. Eventually, Gunner's life gets flipped upside down when he and his family move to this rough, fictional neighborhood called Hillside, which is this predominantly African American community. Throughout the book, Gunner is trying to fit in and find his place in this new world that he's been thrown into. We learn that Gunner is a natural talent at basketball and he's a gifted poet. These two talents push Gunner into a role that he never really asked for. He's being the spokesperson for his community that's searching for meaning and direction. A lot happens to Gunner and the people he encounters in Hillside. However, it becomes clear that Gunner no longer has the choice to do what he wants. Given his status, which he never really asked for in the first place, his life transforms into an idea or cause. If you've read The Salad or you're familiar with Paul Beatty's work, expect a lot of raw dialogue and classic chaotic satire because this book has just a good deal of it. Yet I found many moments of humor and reflective ideas. There's also a lot of moments where you actually learn some street knowledge and some unwritten rules of a rough neighborhood, which I found really interesting. This is the beauty and magic of this book. It blends the absurdity of the satire with the coming of age story of Gunner, and it brings up difficult topics like race, society's expectations, and what it means to belong in a community, in a group. Given the unconventional style of this book, I will say it's not for everyone. There were many times I was reading this book where I was like, I'm not 100% sure what the author is trying to tell me here, but I know he's trying to tell me something to take away from this. I really enjoyed this book. Paul Beatty's writing is just so brilliant in addressing heavy topics through the absurd book plot and the actions by the characters. You will laugh. You'll feel disgusted. You'll feel inspired. You will also feel uncomfortable. all at once, which is really just remarkable. Check it out for yourself and buckle up for this wacky yet meaningful journey that this book takes you. You will not regret it. Imagine you're in a war torn country behind enemy lines. You have a dangerous yet important mission to carry out where death is basically inevitable. Your only support is a group of guerrilla fighters in the Spanish mountains. If this is you, you are Robert Jordan in Ernest Hemingway's classic For Whom the Bell Tolls. When you think of famous world conflicts in the early 20th century, you probably think of World War I or World War II. However, there was another major conflict that took place in the late 1930s known as the Spanish Civil War. The Spanish Civil War was fought between the Republicans and the Nationalists. The Nationalists were these conservative, fascist, military-led group led by the eventual dictator of Spain, Francisco Franco. Our book takes place during the Spanish Civil War, and we follow our main character, Robert Jordan, an American volunteer who fights for the Republican side of the conflict. He is skilled in explosives and is tasked with blowing up a strategic bridge in the Spanish mountains. Like I said, Robert's only support is this group of guerrilla fighters who are all quite the characters. You have Pablo, the official leader of the group, but you also have Pablo's partner, Pilar, who I would argue is the unofficial leader of the group and really just keeps the group intact. You also meet some very fascinating side characters in the book who are also guerrilla fighters who each have their own unique story and history. This is a war novel, but it is also a love story as well. Robert falls in love with a girl in the guerrilla group who goes by Maria, whose family was killed by the fascists, and unfortunately, she faced abuse by the fascists in the book. As far as war novels go, this is as good as it gets. When you think war, it's easy to think of like fast paced, intense action 24/7. And don't get me wrong, there is action in this book. But what I really love about this book, it shows the non flashy parts of war. It shows the preparation, it shows the scoping of the mission, and the real anxieties that war brings out in characters in real time. The character dialogue is just amazing. You learn a lot about not just Robert's background, but the background of the side characters, and each side character has just a unique story to it. I really don't want to spoil too much more, but you learn a lot about the atrocities that occur in Spain during the time of this war. Some of it really is just bone chillingly brutal, like super brutal. The love story between Robert and Maria is so raw and beautiful as well. The ending especially just made me choke up. I remember after reading this book, I had to put it down a little bit just to reflect on the beauty that I just read because it's just a great novel. There are so many things one could take away from this book. For me, this book highlights the loss of innocence, courage in the face of danger, ideology versus reality, and the importance of things like love and nature in the face of war. Great book overall. In my early reading days, I had a hit and miss relationship with Hemingway, but I really enjoyed this book. It is kind of a long read, but the payout is so worth it because it's such an epic book with just amazing dialogue. Go ahead and check it out, you won't regret it. Have you ever read a book so thrilling that it left you just wanting more and more? You keep telling yourself one more chapter and I will call it a day. Okay, one more chapter. That doesn't count. Another chapter. Well, that is exactly how I would describe this brilliant yet entertaining crime mystery novel, Charlesgate Confidential. This novel revolves around the infamous art heist that took place at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston during the 1940s. The beauty of this novel is, in a way, it is three stories in one that spans over 70 years. However, all three stories revolve around the setting of the Charlesgate building in Boston. Charlesgate was a building in the late 1800s as an upscale hotel during the Gilded Age, and the building goes through various transformations during the 70-year period of the book. The first story takes place in 1946, and the Charlesgate is now a rundown, low income housing complex where shady activity takes place. I'm talking about prostitution and illegal gambling rings that take place there. This is where the art gallery heist is orchestrated, and we are introduced to some shady and influential characters. The second story takes place in 1986, where the Charlesgate is now a college dormitory. One of our main characters, Thomas Donnelly, a journalism student, is given an assignment to write about the Charlesgate, given all the myths and history surrounding the building where the story of the 1946 heist resurfaces. The third story takes place in 2014, where the Charlesgate is now an upscale condo. A real estate agent is murdered in the building. Martin Coleman, a Boston detective assigned to investigate, goes down the rabbit hole and gets caught up in the building's history where the infamous unsolved art heist comes back to life again 7 decades later. When you think of three plots happening all at once, there is the assumption that things can get kind of lost and confusing. However, the author does a terrific job in making it all work in a way that is just easy to follow and keeps you engaged. My description is just a scratch on the surface because so much happens during this 70-year period. There's a lot of engaging material from murders, amazing character dialogue, suspenseful actions, and trying to connect the dots and unravel the mystery of the three time periods. The characters are amazing too. Each one is unique in their own way and brings something different to the book. Some characters make appearances in the various time periods. Even the characters who are only present during one time period still left a very meaningful mark in the story. There are two additional factors in this book that really just creates a soft spot for me when thinking about this book. The first factor is the backdrop of the Boston Red Sox across the three timelines. I am a sports fan, and although I'm not a fan of the Red Sox, they are a historic franchise, and you experience the tormented and eventual success of the franchise. From Buckner's error to the end of the Curse of the Bambino, where the Sox eventually won it all. The second factor is the fact that this story takes place in Boston. I currently live in the Boston area, and I really enjoyed the descriptions of the familiar settings that I experience every day. From the names of the streets, the experience of Boston's public transportation, and the famous and not so famous sites throughout the city. Even if you're not a Boston local, the author does a really good job of making the descriptions of the city come to life. When I first read Five Decembers, I thought this was going to be the best crime novel that I would read for a long time. However, Charlesgate Confidential may change my opinion on that. Either way, I can't recommend this book enough. It has everything from a thrilling plot, amazing characters, and it leaves you on the edge of your seat with all the suspense that happens. It makes it super difficult to put the book down. Experience it for yourself, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did because I really loved this book. Now and then you hear about an author who many people rave about. For some reason, you really haven't gotten around to reading some of their work. Eventually, I knew the time would come to give this author a try, and after reading this book, it made me so disappointed in myself because this book was just amazing. I'm talking about James Baldwin and his book, If Beale Street Could Talk. This book is set in Harlem in the 1970s and revolves around our two young main characters, Fonnie and Tish. Fonnie and Tish are childhood friends who fall in love and want to get married. However, Fonnie is arrested for a crime he did not commit, and to complicate it further, Tish is pregnant with Fonnie's child. This book has a non-linear structure and it goes back and forth from the past and present. We learn about how Tish and Fonnie met, the journey that led them to fall in love, Tish's visits to Fonnie in jail, and how Tish and her family find ways to get Fonnie released. This book tackles so many deep themes, mainly the issue of racism and its effect on the characters. You get a first-hand look at the inequality of the justice system towards minorities, and all the hoops and obstacles African Americans have to jump through to be treated fairly and how this oppression leaves a lasting, haunting mark on the characters. There is a section where one of Fonnie's friends describes his experience getting arrested and pressure to plead guilty to avoid additional charges. And his experience in jail really just breaks your heart after all the things that he went through. What I found really interesting in this book was the key differences between Tish's and Fonnie's families. Without spoiling too much, Tish's family is more close knit and are full of joy in hearing the news that Tish is pregnant. However, Fonnie's family, specifically his mother and sisters who disapprove of Tish and Fonnie's love, curse the baby. The only one from Fonnie's family who seems to be happy with this news is his father, Frank. Given Fonnie's family situation, Tish's family views Fonnie as one of their own, and the amount of time and effort they put to try and free Fonnie is really just beautiful. They hire a lawyer. Fonnie's dad and Tish's family scramble for extra money for his potential bail money, all while trying to take care of pregnant Tish. So yes, there's a lot of examples of disgusting racism and inequality in this book, but there's also a lot of examples of love, perseverance, and acceptance from family. Obviously, this is a love story, and Tish and Fonnie's love is just so beautiful and raw. They never give up on each other despite all the injustice that has happened to them. They are such easy characters to root for, and their love story just really just tugs at your heartstrings. Overall, a phenomenal book, and it tackles so many heavy subjects and beauty at the same time. Baldwin's writing is so great, and I am so mad at myself that it took me this long to read some of his work because he is just a brilliant writer. It may have been my first James Baldwin book, but I know this is not going to be my last. Highly recommend this book. Go ahead and give it a try. Have you ever had a book on your to be read shelf for so long that it sort of just haunts you? I've had this book for a while, but for some reason I was not in a huge rush to read it. After struggling what to choose for my next book and realizing how long I had this book for, I just decided to give it a try. I'm talking about A Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. This is a book on martial arts and strategy written in the 17th century by Miyamoto Musashi, a legendary Japanese swordsman. The book is divided into five sections that represent a specific element or ring of strategy. Five rings are earth, water, fire, wind, and void. Each ring covers a different aspect of strategy and combat philosophy, ranging from adaptability, fundamentals, importance of timing, The psychological impact of combat. Yes, this book covers a lot of strategy in combat, but a lot of the lessons can be applied to everyday life. There's emphasis on discipline and always striving for self improvement through everyday practice and dedication. That really resonated with me. All that to say, you do not have to be a martial arts fan to enjoy this book because a lot what's covered in this book can be applied to our everyday lives. There's a lot of translations of this book. My translation was about 100 pages or so, and it talked about Musashi's life and how Japan was at the time. As a history nerd, I really enjoyed it, and it painted an awesome background before diving into the material of this book. Short book, but it's an amazing book with timeless wisdom and strategy. Go ahead and check it out. All right, this concludes my April book recap. Again, I think April was an amazing reading month for me, and I wanted to talk briefly about looking ahead towards May. I will be out of town for a work trip during the first 2 weeks of the month of May. So, all that to say, I'm unsure how that's going to impact my reading time. But regardless, I'm looking forward to what May is going to bring, despite how many books I end up reading by the end of that month. Without spoiling too much, I think May will finally be the month I decide to read a book that I've just been dying to read, but I will leave it at that for now. Again, thank you so much for your support. Feel free to like, subscribe, or share your opinions and book recommendations. I always welcome it and I always look forward to it. Until next time, take care, stay safe, and happy reading. Bye, everyone.